So thank you very much for coming to this presentation, and thank you Noor, Koen, Thomas and Vera from Future Planet Studies at the University of Amsterdam for organizing this event. I'm very grateful that you're doing that. So today's title is Do Look Up, a plan to cool the planet within 1 generation through forest regeneration. Let me see if I can get to the next slide. Yes, okay. So first, a little bit about myself. I am Dutch, I'm 65, my name is Rob de Laat. I'm an adventurer, I'm a philosopher, an entrepreneur. I've been doing business as an adventure travel entrepreneur, and I've been a climate activist, basically full-time volunteer for the last 10 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about the journey that took me towards this point that I'm actually having the audacity to say that we can actually cool the planet. And it's even more than that, we must. So when I was young, since 1974, I was thinking about the crisis we are now in as humanity. We were not then. There was a lot of trouble in the world, there always is, but this was different. And it was because of the Limits to Growth, a book that I read when I was 16. I have been knowing about climate change since 1988, when James Hansen talked to the Congress in the United States about the consequences of climate change and global warming. And when I heard about it, I thought, well, that's so obvious, we're going to do something about it. That was kind of a blooper. And after that, because I've been traveling a lot and then I've been working hard to build a company, I wasn't really aware what's going on in the world. But when I finally sold my company in 2007, I realized not much was done. But because temporarily I had a big bag of money, I actually enjoyed my life a little bit Playboy style, and I gave a lot away. And I also decided to buy a large piece of land in the rainforest in Brazil in order to offset my ridiculously large footprint. And so in 2011, I bought that valley. There was no electricity, there was no internet, so I didn't live there at first, but I started living there in 2013. And from that time on, I have been thinking not just about the horrible things that will happen if we don't stop global warming, but also how to get us out of the mess we're in. And what I learned from rewilding this small tropical valley in the damaged part of the rainforest, which was largely cleared for cows, was, first of all, I was amazed at how fast nature regenerates itself if you just give her a chance. It was also very clear that you need to work with water in order to revive a valley. And the simple thing I did, I dug a lot of holes and had them filled with water so that the valley got wetter. And within years, the first springs were coming back that had dried out. And it was, although I didn't measure it, temperatures were coming down in this valley. My guesstimate is between 2 and 4 degrees compared to valleys nearby that are deforested. The number of birds and reptiles have been bouncing back enormously. I think the amount of birds might be as much as 4 times as high as it was before I came in. Mammals take more time. Most of them have been killed off in this area, unfortunately, but we did have the honor of receiving once a jaguar and puma on the area, which hadn't been seen, these animals hadn't been seen within a generation. And I think the most important lesson I learned was that nature, especially tropical nature, is incredibly, incredibly resilient. So here you see 2 pictures of a part of the valley that I bought and I'm reforesting, and there's 5 years in between. And on one side you see the pastures with some cows in there. And 5 years later already, there's a lot of overgrowth in the front, as you can see. A part of that is actually tree planting, which we did, but a part is also just nature bouncing back and doing its own seeding and growing. And it was very nice, and it is still lovely to live there. First of all, working with local people and also with animals. We have horses and donkeys and dogs and sheep, and still a few cows and chickens. That's all wonderful. We grow some of our own food, which is very nice. Although I'm a bit lazy there, so I still buy a lot of stuff in the supermarket. We're getting increasing wildlife, but some we have to help a bit. I released 45 tortoises because they were locally extinct, because they are apparently very delicious and obviously very easy to catch and put into the soup. And you see one picture here which has a small waterfall. It's about the size of a human. And that came back. It was a spring that had completely dried out and had come back, and it's getting stronger and stronger and is flowing all around the year. There's 12 now of them, back from 6 when I started. And actually, if you're in the neighborhood, it is in Brazil, I know, but you're welcome to stay. But you do have to stay a couple of days because it's quite remote. So that's my story, but now we really have to go to the story about the situation where we are in. We are in code red for humanity. And that's not my words, those are the words of Antonio Guterres, who is the United Nations Secretary General. And he is one of the people who does understand the situation we are in. And here is a chart which shows what we are doing since the 1970s. Basically, we have had conferences about climate change and what to do about it. And as you can see, we had now 26 COPs. We had a lot of agreements and a lot of climate circuses, and the whole the CO2 in the atmosphere is just going up and up and up. As Albert Einstein said, insanity is trying something over and over again and expecting a different outcome. The world is mad, the way we approach climate change, because the way we are going right now, we are on the road to hell, paved with good intentions. And most of you here in this lecture are young. Your future is at stake. We are heading beyond 3 degrees warming by the end of the century, according to many climate scientists, if we go on like this. And we are at 1.2 right now. And I have something to say about that 1.2. At 1.2, we are already in big trouble, though the effects are still not completely visible, especially here in the global north. But 1.5 years ago, it's already more than 2 years ago, an article appeared in Nature magazine, which with some of the leading climate scientists, saying that they were raising the alarm and said that not only is there global warming, but there are, in this big system called the planet, there are systemic climate elements which are on the move, which are starting to start to act in a way that you could call them tipping points. And a tipping point is something that at some point it goes beyond a certain limit that you can't get it back into where it was. So the ones that are on the move are the coral reefs that are bleaching, the ice sheets that are melting, the permafrost that are melting in northern Siberia and in Canada and Alaska, which has as a bad side effect that a lot of methane is coming out of there, increasing global warming. So that's a vicious cycle. We have burning boreal forests, and we'll later see that burning forests are much worse than we think. We have slowing ocean currents, which actually changes the climate, especially in here in Europe in the coming decades. And we're near the point of Amazon dieback, which is not as much caused by global warming as it is by human destruction of that the largest tropical rainforest in the world. So I think that 1.2 is actually a temperature that we shouldn't, we can't keep, because even if we keep it at 1.2, slowly things will go completely pear-shaped. And already they are in many places in the world, especially in Africa, for instance, and also you see in South America some effect. And I'd like to say very clearly that I'm not the only one who says this is the last decade we can turn things around, because afterwards things will go in a way that we can't control the effect anymore. Now, I want to share you a couple of facts with you. Climate facts, maybe some of them are not that well known, because all about climate change seems to move around CO2. Okay, climate change is caused, global warming is caused because there is more heat coming in than is radiating out from our planet. And here's the figures: 345 watts per square meter are coming in, and 342 are going back out. So we have an imbalance of 3 watts. A watt is a joule per second, so it's a unit of time. Or basically, we have an imbalance of 1% of the total energy imbalance, and that maybe gives you some clue that we might actually be able to do something about it. The other thing that is quite often unknown, because everybody is staring at CO2, is that the heat balance of the planet is largely regulated with water. The reason why we are not really focusing on it, because water is very complex. First of all, we have it as gas and as liquid and as ice. We have it in the ground, in biomass, in clouds, as invisible vapor, as ice crystals in the troposphere. So every time when it's somewhere else in the hydrological cycle, it either warms or cools, and that's why we've never been able to model it. And what you can't model, you can't manage. So all the attention goes to CO2. But water vapor, just water vapor, is responsible for about 2/3 of the greenhouse effect, and CO2 for about 30%, and the remaining for the other greenhouse gases. Another climate fact, we'll see how important it is that since 1880, we have deforested an area the size of China, or roughly 10 billion hectares. Another not so known climate fact is that evapotranspiration, that is the transpiration that happens through the leaves of trees and other plants, water vapor is, they suck up water and then they release it in form of vapor, takes about 1/4 of all energy back into the higher atmosphere of our planet. So that's substantial. And estimates are that in the Amazon rainforest, this is about as high as 75% of the incoming energy from the sun is basically transported back into the atmosphere as water vapor. The Amazon rainforest alone, the evaporation transports about 190 years of energy production of the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world, to give you just some idea of the immense amount of energy that is going through these systems. And of course, in the tropics, we have the most impact because most sun is there. And another thing that is quite often not known is that clouds reflect about 1/3 of all incoming radiation back into space. So clouds cool the planet as well. So taking all this into consideration, we may have to look at a completely different way at our planet. First of all, forests have been developing over tens of millions of years, and basically are the Earth's organs to create a gentle climate, which is especially good for life on the planet. The Earth is a living system. The Earth is alive, and it is intelligent. Although it takes quite a lot of time to get its inventions right, it does design its forest in a way that it actually gives us this beautiful climate that we had until recently. So we need to focus much more on nature to get us out of the mess we're in. And this is actually what I call a Copernican shift, to understand that the world, that the earth is alive, and that nature is actually forming solutions in an intelligent way through evolution to resolve life's problems. Now, if we go a little bit more into depth about what clouds are actually doing, then you can see, I call it here, it's a cooling dance between water and forests. If a cloud rains out, it becomes liquid, it becomes rain, it falls on the ground, and their trees absorb it, pump it up, and through evapotranspiration, the water vapor goes up again. So, and in this cycle, if a raindrop, if water vapor turns from vapor into liquid, it releases a lot of energy. It's about 529 joules per gram, but it does so in the higher atmosphere. So the moment that there is this transformation from gas to liquid, that that energy is radiated out in the form of photons. So it's transporting out energy. Now, when it's evaporating again, it goes from liquid to vapor. Again, it absorbs 529 joules per gram, and it rises up and releases that energy again on the top of the clouds. And at the same time, forests, they emit organic aerosol particles that form clouds. So you can see that forests are the cooling organs of the planet in play with the water cycle. This slide has been made by friends of mine. You can find them at greenwatercools.org. They have read more than 1,000 articles, scientific articles, to substantiate the fact that forests cool much more than the climate models give. Another thing that we should know about forests is that actually, if forests were not there, the inside of our continents would be deserts, because forests actually transport humidity into our continents. I will not go into the mechanism of it. We can talk about it later in Q&A if you want to. But without forests, the inner continents would not be irrigated. So the forests are actually irrigating and creating biomass thousands of kilometers away from the seas, where the water, the humidity is coming from in the first place. Now here you see the photosynthesis production on the planet throughout the year. And you see that in the global north, of course, in the winter, there's hardly any activity. It bounces back in the summer. But all the time you see that the largest real impact is in the tropical forests, because there's much more sunlight hitting the equatorial areas. And here, it starts to, and here you can see that actually throughout the year, the moisture transportation is mainly taking place over the equatorial areas. And you can even see the flying rivers going over the Amazon and some over Africa going from east to west, doing the precipitation and the irrigation of continents. So now, summarizing, we know that forests cool through rain, cooling the surface and transporting heat out to the higher atmosphere. They form clouds, increasing the reflectivity or albedo of areas. They make wind and atmospheric rivers, transporting moisture to the interior of continents. And they have spongy soils which retain water to keep soils moist for a much longer time, making it possible for photosynthesis and bioactivity for a longer time during the year. And because it retains this water, water has time to filter into the earth and filling up aquifers. Now, with all these capabilities of forests, I am now stating that we can actually cool the planet between 1.5 to 1 degree centigrade within a generation if we restore degraded landscapes, forests, and we change to agroforestry, which I will explain later, and create as green as possible cities. Now, we should go on decarbonizing our economy. We should go on with the energy transition for sure. We should go circular. There's no doubt about it. We need to relocalize and reform our food production. And we should consume much less animal protein. It's all true. But front loading the fight against climate change with forest regeneration is, as far as I can see, the only way out of the mess we're in. So if we're going to do that, how are we going to do that? Well, the first one is an obvious one, a full global moratorium on deforestation of prime forests today. Not 2030. I thought it was a typing error when they said it at COP26, today. The second one is, you saw that in the tropical forests, you can bounce back the vegetation and nature much faster. So we should reward people in the global south to regenerate their lands at scale, to create forests and to turn from the monoculture type of production into agroforestry with closed canopies. We need to regenerate 1 billion hectares in a decade, so something the size of China or the United States. This can only be done if it's supported by technology, the digital architecture for global regeneration, which I will explain after. Obviously, this is the largest project ever undertaken by humanity. So it will need an enormous coalition of civil society, companies, institutions, and of course, all of us. Finance is actually not a problem. The guesstimate is that it would cost between 1 to 2% of global GDP, which is the same amount as we spend right now on destructive subsidies and fossil fuel subsidies. And it's 10% of the amount that was spent to avert the financial meltdown in 2008. So if we can afford to rescue the financial system, then we should certainly, at a tenth of the cost or a fifth of the cost, be able to save the planet. Knowing that we can cool the planet, and we should do it, and we have to do it now before the climate effects get so strong that it becomes a runaway effect and we can't no longer stop it. So if you're convinced of this story, I hope you'll make it your story. Now, if we do that, what do we get in return? First of all, and that's the most important, and that's quite a breakthrough if you listen to the COPs, global temperature will likely go down before 2050. There will be a first year that we can hooray and see it dipping. Something that's quite often forgotten is that forests actually calm weather. They calm heat waves, they calm storms, they calm droughts. So we'll get calmer weather. I can even show you studies that hurricanes actually in the neighborhood of large forests become less powerful. We'll significantly reduce poverty and revitalize the global south, because we will pay hundreds of millions of people to regenerate their own lands, and doing something about the ridiculous imbalance on our planet in terms of between the inequality between rich and poor. We will have a lot more water and food security for billions of people, because those areas will become much more calmer and gentler and retain more water, so the food production will go up. Obviously, we also are in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, and regenerating so many forests will also bounce back a lot of species We will regenerate our biodiversity. And most of the SDGs get greatly improved as well. So what's not to like about the package? Now, one of the most complex things about how to do something this scale, the largest project ever undertaken by humanity, is that it needs to be supported by the digital architecture for global regeneration, which consists of 5 pillars. And I'll go quickly through these pillars. The first one is imagine a Facebook, but now a Facebook and a marketplace together, where all regenerative NGOs, companies, shops, etc., come together to find each other and to strengthen each other in project making for regeneration. The second one is the Arara app, which you should think of as the Uber of reforestation, where everybody can upload themselves with a cell phone and start making money regenerating. The third one is a regenerative digital currency, which is once the system is big enough and there's enough companies and NGOs and people in it that start interacting, we launch a regenerative digital currency that is independent of the current destructive financial system. And once that starts to circulate around and people start using it, you get a flywheel effect to pump up the regenerative economy. All of this should be based on a blockchain. And let me straight away say that everybody knows the big footprint of Bitcoin, but there are footprints of blockchain techniques that are maybe 1 or 2% of that of Bitcoin. So that's not a deal breaker. And if you have a blockchain, basically means a technology that you have immutable registration of trillions of transactions that you can always find back. So it brings transparency, which you can actually disclose on the internet. And we do it with NFTs. You all you've heard of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Basically, they are unique units. They could be a piece of art, but in this case, the NFTs will be hectares. We divide the whole world up, all land up in hectares, and each hectare is monitored by satellite to see what is happening on there. And satellites can now monitor biomass increase. So you can connect carbon credits automatically to increase of biomass on every hectare in the world. Of course, we start in the tropics. The last one, DAOs and smart contracts, I'm not going to explain too much, but they have something to do with decision-making, a new form of democracy. And smart contracts are actually not that smart. Basically, it's self-executing decision-making. If you decide that you'll get $1,000, you will give 20% to the hospital, 20% to the schools, and 60% goes into dividing by people to go and buy stuff for themselves. You just put it in a smart contract, and the payment goes automatically once the money goes in to those purposes without any human interference. And all of this can be seen from the internet, so that corruption is actually very difficult to do because you can't hide. Now here is the Arara. The Arara is the word, the Tupi Namba indigenous word for this beautiful bird, one of the most spectacular birds in the world, the macaw, that flies over the Amazon rainforest in the morning to greet the dawn and makes a lot of noise when doing that. And that is the name for this application that you can have on a cell phone, which basically connects. You can upload your land there. It can be 1 hectare, it can be 100 hectares. Communities can do it. The satellite will measure the biomass, and if there is an increase, you get automatic payments to your cell phone. We can combine that with microcredits for people to start their regenerative projects. And if those payments go well, then they can get new credits for new regenerative activities. If we do it like that, we can automate it, and more than 90% actually lands in the hand of the rural people who will do the regeneration, which is not the case right now. And carbon credits can grow up to $1 trillion per year by 2030. That's enough to finance the regenerative revolution and to cool the planet by the end of the century. You will need a bit of upfront financing to upstart the whole thing, but by the end of this decade, sorry, I said century. The end of this decade, it will be it will pay for itself. So let me one more time stress the urgency, and I think the urgency is not understood even by the people in the IPCC, because the IPCC doesn't see the planet as a living system. And we know in our own lives, in our own bodies, that, for instance, if you go out skating and it's very cold out there, for hours you can keep up your body temperature, but at some point things go pear-shaped, and then suddenly the system breaks down, you get undercooled. The same kind of tipping points are in the Earth system, and we're closer than we think. And the idea is to kick off this plan in Stockholm in June of 2022, this year. That's the 50th anniversary of the first environmental conference of the United Nations. And we also want to have this story told at the COP. The 27th COP will not be another show of incompetence and measures that are not enough to get us out of the mess we're in. And on the 1st of January, when next year, when we have a new government in Brazil, we hope to kick off large enough projects with global fundraising to reforest the Amazon 1 soccer field per minute. So this is about your future, and nobody else is going to save it for you. If you believe this story, then contact me and get involved. The details will be shared with you later on. I don't know exactly how that's going to be, but this presentation is available for you. So I thank you for your attention. I hope it wasn't too long, and I'll stop sharing here.